All right, so let's look at trying to find the domain of this function. So remember, when we're talking about domain, what we're looking for are all possible input values that give us some output value. So basically what it means is just where do we see our graph? For what values of x does the graph actually exist? So we can see that our graph stops here and stops here. So it has endpoints. It's not going on forever in both directions. So we do have a starting and a stopping point for this function. So if we're thinking about the x values, what is the starting point of our function? So we can see that it starts down here at -4. So right here, our graph starts at -4. And then we can move along the x axis all the way up until we get to this point here at 6, right? So starts from here and goes all the way to here. Now, if you look at all the values in between -4 and 6, we have to ask ourselves, is there anywhere on this interval where it looks like our graph does not exist? Are there any holes or big gaps in our graph? And it doesn't seem to look like it. So it looks like the domain is going to be everything on that interval from -4 to 6. So remember, if we wanted to write this in interval notation, it would be from -4 to 6. But now we have to consider the endpoints. So are the endpoints included in the domain? Well, if we take a look at our graph here, we can see that the endpoints are solid dots. They're not open circles. So that means that they are included. So remember, when they are included, that means we use brackets for our endpoints. So we're going to have brackets here for our endpoints. So this is the interval notation for the domain. If you wanted to talk about the set notation, it would be the set of all x such that, and then the inequality is x is in between -4 and 6, or -4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 6, and that would be the domain. Now, if we're talking about the range, so the range is the same idea as the domain, except now we're talking about y values. So we want to look at, well, what is the lowest that this graph goes and what's the highest that this graph goes? So the smallest y value, or the lowest y value, we can see down here at -2, right? So we have this value down here at -2, and it doesn't look like anything's going to go below this. And then the highest that this graph goes looks like it's up here at 3. So all of these values in between are going to be the range. So from there to there. Because if we look at our graph, just like we noticed with the x values, it doesn't look like there's any holes or gaps or jumps in the y values. There's a continuous graph the entire way from all the way from -2 up to +3 in the y's. So if we're talking about this in interval notation, it would be starting down here at -2 and working its way all the way up to 3. So from -2 all the way up to 3. And again, we have to consider the endpoints. So at those values, are they included in that interval? Well, here at -2, right, at 2, -2, it's a closed circle. And then here at 5, 3, it's also a closed circle. So we do include those values. So we use brackets. Now, for this one, with the range, if we wanted to talk about it in set notation, it would be the set of all y, because we're talking about y values, such that y is in between -2 and 3, or -2 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 3. Now again, we're using y because we're talking about the range and the y values here. Okay. So next, let's look at the x-intercepts. So remember, the x-intercepts are just where our graph crosses or touches the x-axis. And that happens in 3 places. You can kind of just walk along the x-axis and look at where it touches. So we can see we have an x-intercept here, we have an x-intercept here, and we have an x-intercept here. Well, what are those 3 ordered pairs? Well, x-intercepts happen at 0, 0, right here. at 4, 0. And then also here at 6, 0. So those are our x-intercepts. Where are our y-intercepts? The y-intercepts are where our graph touches the y-axis. And because this is a function, it should only have one y-intercept because it would have to pass the vertical line test. And we can see that that occurs right here. So our y-intercept is the origin. Next, we're asked, how often does the line y equals -1 intersect the graph? So remember that y equals is a horizontal line. So if we draw the line y equals -1, that's about halfway in between 0. It's exactly halfway in between 0 and -2. We can draw this line here, a horizontal line. And we can ask ourselves, well, how many times does this line intersect our graph? You can see that if we were to continue on in both directions with this graph, that it's going to intersect our graph 2 places, here and here. So how often does it intersect the graph? You would say 2 times. Now, how often does the equation x equals 1 intersect our graph? Now, x equals 1 is a vertical line, and that's going to be in between 0 and 1 on the x-axis here. It's going to be this vertical line here. We want to know how many times does this line intersect our graph. And we can see that it only happens at this one point here, that one point there. So it only happens once. And again, that makes sense because similar to the y-intercepts, it has to only hit once in order for it to be a function because it has to pass the vertical line test. All right. And for what value of x does our function equal -3? So remember, this f of x equals -3. This just means that y equals 3. Sorry, not -3, +3. So for what values of x does f of x equal +3? That's really just saying for what values of x is y +3. So we go to +3 on the y, and we just kind of move across, and we look at, well, where does our graph equal 3? And that happens only in one place, and that is at this point right here. And the x value that makes that true is 5. So when x equals 5, the y value is 3. For what values of x does our function f of x equal -2? So again, f of x is the same as y. So where is our y? -2. So go to the y-axis, go to -2, kind of look across and ask yourself, well, where is y -2? And that only happens here at this one point where the x value is +2.